Hi my friend, in this video we're going to be making dark tech house drums inspired by James Hype's song Vibrate. And we're going to find out if we can do this in under 30 minutes using the 80-20 rule of tech house drums. What you're listening to right now is the track that we'll be working on, and what you're looking at now is the Ableton project file that we'll be working on. In particular, we're going to focus on this drum group right here, and we're going to go in order of the layers that I actually built this out originally, so you can kind of follow along when you are creating your own drums. I'm going to show you how to quickly get to a professional quality level with only 20% of the effort by working with a reference track to quickly guide your decisions, as well as saving hours of time by effortlessly mixing as you go by using things like this. These powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one knob effects. So stick around to the end for a full recap of the 80-20 rule as well. All in all, this really took me about 25 to 30 minutes to recreate these drums, and this entire track, as you can see here, mixed, mastered, arranged, and ready to go, took about 5 to 6 hours of in-studio time. So if you want to finish songs faster as well, I've made you a free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song like this every single week. Just visit the link that's on screen now or in the description to grab the ultimate song finishing toolkit for free. And if you want to take things to the next level, you can also find a link to this video's project files in the description as well. So with that said, let's get into this. All right. So usually when building up the drums, the first thing I like to work on is the kick. It's kind of one of the integral elements of like a dance music track, so it's important to get that right. And before diving into the kick, again, one of the biggest main things of the 80-20 rule with house drums here is to use a reference track. So I have the reference track here, the actual song, James Hype's Tita Lao, Vibrate, and I've set up so when I press the S key on my keyboard, it'll solo the reference track, so I can flick back and forth between it like this. Just like that. So first, let's kind of just take a listen to the kick by itself. So you can see here now, the first thing is that usually one of the first things I'll look at is the pattern. So just flicking back and forth between the reference track and this, I could see that it's just kind of the classic 4-on-floor, like this. And then at the end of every 2 bars, there's a little bit of almost like a fill. So once the pattern is set up nicely, you can see here, it's just straight up like this, and the velocities I just maxed out, except for I dropped the velocity down a little bit on that little fill kick, so it's not too overpowering. Once I get the notes down, the next main thing is the sound selection. So the way that I went about this is there's a couple ways. One is I do have this rack with multiple different kick drum sounds in it, and I set it up so that there's this little selector so I can switch between them. The idea is you can switch back and forth between the track and yours, and kind of listen to different kick drums until you find one that sounds as close as possible to the reference track. However, in this instance, what I did is I actually stole the kick drum from the track. So this is a cool little tip that you can do. What you do is either in the intro or the outro of the reference track, ideally get the extended mix so that it has that longer intro or outro. You want to find a part in the intro or outro where the kick is playing, and ideally there's no kind of like low pass or any kind of little arrangement trick going on. It's the kick playing in full. So in this instance, I believe I found it somewhere in the beginning of the track around here. So you can see what I did is I just went into the reference track here and I sliced out a kick that I thought sounded nice, and then I dragged it into this Ableton sampler device here. And so when you do it like this, what's nice is it'll actually drag the entire track into the Ableton sampler. And that way you can easily adjust the start and end points. You can try out a different kick by just adjusting this here, which is a little bit nicer. It gives you some flexibility as opposed to if you just kind of consolidated the kick and then dragged it in. So then what I have here is this little rack called the R kick. And basically all this is, for the most part, is I've macro saved some of the important how would you say this, knobs or settings in the Ableton sampler device, so I don't have to like do some intensive menu diving. It's all just ready to go here. So one of the main things here is this filter frequency. So the filter in Ableton sampler is mapped to here, and I brought it down to 403. So all the way up, it sounds like this. A bunch of noise and other sounds. So it brought it down to about 403, which I thought sounded good, or whatever around here. And the other thing is this filter envelope. So with this dialed all the way down at 403 or even higher than that, it's like a typical how a normal filter would apply by removing a bunch of the highs. And it doesn't sound correct. It just sounds really weird, right? But if you dial in this filter envelope like that, usually all the way, it's just going to sound a little bit nicer and keep the integrity and the punchiness of the kick. And other than that, there's the volume to velocity. I usually dial this up. It's usually about, I think at 30% is where it starts. I usually like to bring it in so it just sounds a little bit fuller and more impactful. I have transpose set up in case I need to do some adjustments. And then I'll have Ableton, I think I'm using, Ableton Saturate, just bring in some saturation, fill out the sound a little bit. And then I do have some quick decay, sustain, release knobs here to dial in the tightness of the track, as well as a high shelf. As you can see here, just dialing that in, removing some of the high end, but not using a low pass filter. It just sounds a little bit more natural. And that's a look at that. And everything's just kind of set up to this device here so that everything is very quick and easy to access. If you would like to grab this, the Ableton project files will be available with the second link in the description. So you can grab this entire project file. You can snag any of the cool little nifty little Ableton racks and all these kind of little tricks that I've built out. Link for that is in the description. With that said, the first thing again is the notes. The second thing is the sound selection. And then the third thing, really, as you can see here, there's no other crazy processing going on. It's really just dialing in the volume. So the main thing is, if we go back here to the loop that we have going on, pressing the S key back and forth, trying to land it kind of on the kick so you can really hear your sound against the reference track. So let's go ahead and I'll kind of show you what that looks like. So once you have the sound selection, once you have the pattern, the main thing is really big tip here is to just get the volumes right. The volumes is going to get you really that kind of like fast track, that 80% of the way there super quickly. So once the kick is done, next thing I added in was this open hi-hat. So let's take a listen to that. And so now let's have a look at the pattern. So it's a typical open hi-hat pattern. It's just like kind of that offbeat here. And what I've done is every other note just dips in velocity just a little bit, just to kind of keep things dynamic and interesting and kind of humanized in a way. Again, after that, the main thing that I did was just kind of switch between this and the other sounds that I have in this rack to find the right sound. And the main thing again is flicking back and forth between this and the reference track, just like this. I think it's pretty close. Then going through the processing after that, I have this kind of channel strip that I have attached to almost every track that I add in, kind of like a default setting. So basically just removing a bunch of the lows, and then I high shelf up some of the highs just to add a little bit more on the high end. It felt like it was lacking. And I have this one knob kind of transient designer. And so this is using the free KHS transient shaper. Again, I've just mapped some of the controls to the macros here just so it's a lot easier and quicker. Also, a nice extra bonus is like, again, using your ears a little bit more, which is important. So what I just did was dialed up the attack a little bit and brought down the sustain, so it's just a little bit tighter. Main thing, trying to get the sound design right in terms of the sound of it, but also the tightness of the sound quite a bit as well. Then I have this one knob saturation and saturation. The sidechain, or one knob sidechain and saturation. The sidechain I'm not using in this instance, but I'm bringing up the saturation to fill up the sound a little bit. And then not using this width plugin. But this is usually the channel strip that I have on every single track. And again, this will be available if you want to grab the project files in the description. I think that's a good look at that. So we'll move on to the next sound, which is this kind of hi-hat pattern. So let's take a listen and we'll look at the MIDI for this. So I think the main thing you can kind of hear is it's kind of that really quick 16th hi-hat. So let's listen between this and the reference track for a little bit. So it's really just kind of 16th notes with kind of like a little bit of like a swing and a groove to it. So what I did to start was, I believe I started with this track here. So it's just a different open, closed hi-hat sound. And I started with the kind of same pattern as the open hi-hat. To start, and that way it reinforces the open hi-hat and also gives that kind of, it gives you the ability in the arrangement to remove the open hi-hat and you still have that hat there in place of it. So it's still kind of moving and grooving, and then you can add the open hi-hat later, and it just adds more energy to the track. After that, I just kind of added in these kind of 16th note sounds here that I just highlighted, and then played with the velocity, so there's a little bit of a groove. And then once I had that dialed in, I just kind of switched some of the notes you can see here to kind of, the different notes kind of add a bit of like an accent and a bit of a groove, and that was really important. And then also what you might notice is it might look a little complex, but usually what I'll do is start by building out the first bar, and then once that first bar is created, I'll duplicate it and then just make some slight adjustments in some of the note placements or velocities or something like that. So there's a bit of a call and response, a little bit of change happening over time, which is really important to keep a track sounding dynamic and fresh. And again, main thing after that is to flick back and forth between the reference track to get the kind of right patterns and sounds. And then other than that, what we have, I'm running into this Sound Toys effect track using Panman on the, I believe it's the minor movement setting. So it's just kind of moving those hats a little bit of stereo movement left and right. Very subtle, but I find it interesting, cool thing to do. Then running into that channel strip I mentioned, removing a bunch of the lows, tightening it up by removing some of the sustain, adding some fullness by bringing in some saturation, and that's really it. Then the other main thing, again, the most important thing, almost none of that matters compared to flicking back and forth and trying to get the volumes right. So let's have a listen. So I would say comparatively, mine might be a little louder. You can come dial that back. Something like that. That's kind of the main idea there. Next element that I brought in when developing this was the snare. So let's have a listen and a look at that. And so for this, in terms of the pattern, main thing is what I have is two different snares playing. One is kind of playing like really hard, full velocity, and then the other one is doing some kind of variation so that it's layering the snare sound so it sounds kind of fuller and more interesting, and then also the change in dynamics kind of keeps things evolving, just like how we were doing it with the hi-hats. The main thing again though is flicking back and forth. So in terms of the pattern, it's definitely that like on the 2 and on the 4 kind of placement, and then the sound design. Kind of snappy. There also is, you might be noticing if you listen to it, a bit more high end, and in my ear that was kind of coming from a clap. So keep that in mind. We're going to add that in the next layer. But with that said, in terms of any of the processing, anything cool going on, we're just removing some of the lows as usual with this channel strip, removing some of the sustain to tighten up the sound a bit, some saturation to fill things out, and that's about it. Next, let's listen to the clap, where together that's really kind of getting that sound. So let's have a listen. And flick back and forth in the reference. There we go. I would say if we listen to it, I feel like the clap could maybe come up a bit more. Again, the main importance really is that volume. So basically what I did was, in terms of the pattern, it's just on the 2 and 4, just like the snare, nothing too crazy going on there. And then I just flick between these different sounds. 2 ways you can do it is like you're going like this, just grabbing them all and moving them. And then also if you do set things up where you have a selector, you can just go like this and it'll change the sounds as you're moving it about. With that said, other than that, a little bit of processing going on here. Removing some of the lows, a little bit of the sustain getting pulled back to tighten it up, a little bit of saturation to fill out the sound a little bit, and a little bit of this one knob plugin, which is this free wider plugin here. And I've just mapped some of the, again, main knobs to the Ableton rack just to make things easier, and then dialed in some of the whips to kind of move the sound to the left and right a bit, create more of a stereo sound. That way the snares are in the middle and the claps are on the sides, and together they kind of work together to kind of a nice full sound. So then just a couple more layers we're going to go over here. Next ones I have usually like these core elements, so like the kick, the open hi-hat, the hi-hats, the closed hats rather, the snares and the claps. that's kind of like the main driving elements of the drum sound. Then what I usually like to do is layer in some tops, some breaks, things like that, to add a little bit more groove and kind of character to the sound. So let's have a look at the first top layer that I added in, which sounded like this. Listen to it by itself for a second. And so this is kind of reinforcing a little bit of that like kind of 16th note sound. It's kind of like a shaker kind of sound. Very subtle. Main thing is I do want my elements that I added in with the MIDI notes to kind of be the main driving sound, but this adds a little bit of vibe and character. So other than that, just some movements here in terms of removing a ton of the lows to make room for all the other elements in terms of frequencies, and then removing some of the sustain, cutting it up a little bit. Some sidechain here, which the way I usually do sidechain is just with a shaper mapped to the volume. That way it's just going in quarter notes, which is usually what the kick's doing in dance music. So that way you don't have to do any kind of compression, like sidechain routing. It's just done in one knob. You just dial it into taste, which I like to do. This way it's pumping, it's leaving room for the kick, and it's kind of giving a little bit of groove. And then some saturation to fill up the sound a little bit, and then width to make it stereo, push to the left and right a little bit like that. That's really it about that. Let's listen to this next top group that I added. You'll probably hear that a bit more. And we'll listen to it solo. So you can hear it's pretty subtle. The idea is I don't want like somebody else's loop or break or anything like that to be the main drum sound. It's just adding some vibe and character. So I believe I want to do, okay, one thing that I did do is I pulled back the transient. So if you have the warper on beats and you leave it on transients and then you change it to this right pointing area, you can bring back the transient. So normally it sounds like this. Where it would be here, sorry. That's how it sounds full, and then I brought it down to 50. Subtle, but sometimes it's less subtle, but in this case the idea is it tightens up that top loop a lot, and I find that's a really good way to make your top loops and breaks blend in a bit more with your core sounds that you've developed. Other than that, we have a little bit of processing going on here, so a little bit of wilder effects in terms of the EQ, but main thing is we're moving the lows to make some space for the kick and the bass, and then I've shelved out some of the highs to just kind of blend it in, mix it in with the rest of the drums a bit more. And then what did I do here? Okay, and then this is more of an automation thing. So I do have a low pass filter here set up, and right now it's not really doing anything. I just have it at a certain point in the song. I've dragged it back down for a little bit of an arrangement kind of trick. But in terms of the core sound, it doesn't have much to do with anything. Then we have a Sound Toys effects rack where I'm using the Pan Man. Again, using that minor movement preset to just kind of move things ever so slightly between the middle. Just to add some stereo movement, some vibe, that kind of thing. And then some sidechain, so it's pumping and grooving, and it's making room for the kick and the bass. And then a little bit of width to move things to the left and right. That's really a look at the drums for this one. Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here. And if you've been paying attention, then you probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your drums. The goal here is to get 80% of the results with only 20% of the time, energy, or effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule for drums is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're effortlessly hitting 80% of a very professional sounding track. In particular, we focus on nailing the pattern, sound selection, and the volume compared to the reference track so that we keep things fast and focused as we're building out our drums. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume as well as a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our drums. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and to build up a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now, and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later and check out this playlist of videos where I remake drums from other songs from the Beatport top charts. Or if you want to take what you learned in this video to the next level, definitely check out this video right here.